I am Claire Whitmore, 28 years old, and for most of my life, I have known what it feels like to sit in a room where every glance reminds you that you don't belong. That evening, I walked into the Whitmore mansion, the house that carried our family's name like a polished badge, and I felt the familiar weight pressing down again. The dining room glowed under a chandelier, its light catching the crystal glasses and the silverware lined with military precision. My mother, Margaret Peggy Whitmore, had chosen the seating chart. As always, she placed me near the end of the long mahogany table, just close enough to hear the conversations, but far enough to know I was not at the center. Peggy was radiant in her diamonds, her voice already carrying across the room as she spoke with one of the guests about last month's charity gala. My father, Richard Whitmore Sr., sat with his back straight, his posture as rigid as the portraits of ancestors that stared down from the walls. He embodied the Whitmore tradition of control, reputation, and appearances. At the center of their pride was my sister, Catherine Kate Whitmore, who entered the room late and unapologetic, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Kate was everything my parents celebrated: confident, successful in real estate, already known for closing seven-figure condo deals in Atlanta. The smile they reserved for her never reached me. I wore jeans and a plain sweater, clothes that felt more like armor than an oversight. They saw that as rebellion, as proof that I would never fit the mold they demanded. For me, it was a way to breathe, to keep one piece of myself in a house that had always pressed me into silence. I sat down quietly, folding my hands in my lap, while the others clinked glasses and laughed. The sound of cutlery against porcelain filled the pauses between their words. I kept my face calm, though inside I felt the familiar ache. I had chosen my life a startup built with long nights, borrowed offices, and the stubborn belief that technology could change something in this world. To them, it was nothing but a distraction, a hobby unworthy of the Whitmore name. They reminded me often. Still, I returned for dinners like this, not because I needed the food or the company, but because part of me wanted to know if they would ever look across the table and see me. Tonight, the air was heavy with the sense that something was about to shift. My father's watch ticked against the silence. My mother's diamonds flashed as she turned her head toward me, and Kate's smile, sharp as glass, lingered like a warning. They believed I had come with empty hands again. Another night where I would sit, endure, and leave unnoticed. But the truth was different. I carried something none of them expected. And as I looked at their faces glowing under the chandelier, I wondered how long their laughter would last once they discovered it. The first words aimed at me came before the main course had even touched the table. My mother, Margaret Peggy Whitmore, leaned back in her chair, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier's light. Her voice cut through the low hum of conversation. "Claire, you're almost 30. When will you finally grow up and get a real job?" The question wasn't meant for an answer. It was meant to sting, to draw the eyes of the table toward me and remind them all who sat lower on the Whitmore ladder. I felt the weight of her gaze as if it pressed against my chest. Before I could form a reply, my father, Richard Whitmore Sr., set his wine glass down with a careful clink. "Look at your sister," he said, gesturing toward Catherine Kate Whitmore, who smirked as if waiting for the cue. "She's out there closing million-dollar real estate deals. That is what success looks like. Claire, not some app that has yet to make a dime." Kate smiled, her lipstick flawless, her confidence rehearsed. She didn't need to speak yet. My parents did the work for her. The contrast was complete, and I was once again placed in the role of the disappointment, the burden, the dreamer they tolerated. Their words slid across the table like cold steel, meant to cut and remind me of where they thought I belonged. I kept my eyes on the silverware, forcing my hands to remain still. Inside, the old ache rose again, I remembered a Christmas morning years ago, when I was 12, standing in the same room with a gift I had made by hand, an idea for a project that had lit my young mind. My mother had smiled politely, but turned quickly toward Kate's new piano recital trophy, her praise spilling in that direction as though I wasn't even in the room. The memory still carried the same sting. The laughter returned, bouncing off the crystal glasses as they toasted to Kate's latest achievement. I sat quietly, feeling their judgment settle around me like an old coat I had worn too many times. They thought they had written my place into the story already. But if they believed I came here tonight empty, what would they say when they learned the truth waiting in my pocket? Kate couldn't resist stepping into the spotlight my parents had prepared for her. She lifted her glass, swirling the wine slowly before setting it down with a deliberate pause. "You know?" she said, her voice smooth with amusement. "Maybe Claire should take a page from me, get a license. Start small. At least then she'd actually contribute to this family instead of chasing a dream that embarrasses us all." Her laugh followed, sharp and practiced, the kind that had cut me down since childhood. The table erupted in knowing chuckles, the kind that spread quickly when people wanted to be on the safe side of power. My father nodded with approval. My mother pursed her lips as though Kate had spoken with wisdom. I sat there with my jaw tight, my fingers gripping the edge of my chair beneath the table. They didn't see that small tremor, or maybe they did and enjoyed it. Either way, I refused to give them the reaction they wanted. Their words were not new. They had been spoken in different forms at every holiday gathering, every reunion, every night when the Whitmores gathered to remind themselves of their importance. Still, they carried the same sting each time. I remembered the Christmas when I was 12. Holding that small box wrapped in paper, I had decorated myself. Inside was a sketch and a plan for a science project I thought might impress them. But my mother's smile had slipped past me, landing on Kate's piano trophy. "This is what excellence looks like," she had said, her voice swelling with pride, while my box sat unopened in my lap. That same feeling tightened my throat now as I listened to them repeat the old script. Kate's laughter, my parents' nods, the quiet smirks from the guests around us. I was the dreamer, the burden, the child who never measured up. They made sure of it. But tonight, I carried something more than their scorn. My phone rested in my pocket, the weight of it reminding me of the message waiting there. They thought I had come here defenseless again, another night to endure and leave unnoticed, but their confidence blinded them. They had no idea that the foundation of their world, the money that kept their glasses full and their mansion glowing, had never been in their hands. I sat still, letting their mockery echo around the room. Every word they threw at me was another brick in the wall they thought trapped me, yet I knew those same bricks were about to crumble. The conversation carried on without me, the laughter and polished words bouncing across the table as if I weren't there at all. I let them enjoy their performance, beneath the tablecloth. I slipped my hand into my pocket, brushing my fingers against the phone that had buzzed moments earlier. The screen still glowed with a message from Helen Armstrong, the family trust manager. Approval required $20,000 monthly disbursements for Richard, Peggy, and Catherine Whitmore. The words pulsed like a quiet drumbeat for years. They had believed the allowances came to them automatically, as though money simply flowed because their name was Whitmore. They had no idea that since my 25th birthday, every dollar they spent passed first under my hand. I remembered the day my grandfather's attorney called me into his office. The air had smelled of leather-bound books and polished wood. He slid a document across the desk, explaining that my grandfather had written a clause no one else knew. Richard's reckless spending would never risk the family fortune again. When I turned 25, I became the sole trustee of the Whitmore Family Trust, a fortune of $20 million. My parents never asked questions. They assumed the money was theirs to command. I had signed quietly, watching them enjoy their lifestyle, knowing all along that the control was mine. The irony had never been lost on me. Every lecture about my irresponsibility, every accusation of leeching, all while they lived off my decisions. I carried that knowledge like a secret key, one they never thought to look for. Now, as Kate's laughter carried across the table and my mother's diamonds flashed under the chandelier, I let the weight of that truth settle in my chest. They thought I was defenseless, a dreamer with nothing but empty promises. But the reality was sharper than any of their words. And as I slipped the phone back into my pocket, one thought burned quietly in my mind. What would happen when they realized who had been signing all along? The clinking of silverware slowed when the dining room doors opened. Every head turned as Helen Armstrong, the trust manager, stepped inside, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She carried a slim leather folder tucked under her arm, her expression steady, businesslike. Guests shifted in their seats, sensing something unfamiliar had entered a room that thrived on control and appearances. My mother, Margaret Peggy Whitmore, frowned, her hand tightening around her wine glass. "This is a private dinner," she said sharply. Helen didn't flinch. She walked straight to the table, stopped behind my chair, and spoke clearly. "Miss Whitmore, I need your approval for the trust fund disbursements." She placed the folder on the table, her words slicing through the chatter. For a moment, silence reigned. Then came the laughter. My father, Richard Whitmore Sr., leaned back in his chair, his chuckle booming. "This is nonsense. Claire doesn't manage our finances. She can't even manage her own." Kate Whitmore smirked, crossing her arms. "What is this, Claire? Some prank to get attention?" Her tone dripped with scorn, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Helen didn't waver. She opened the folder and slid a document across the table, its embossed seal catching the chandelier's light. According to the stipulations of the Whitmore Family Trust, Miss Claire Whitmore has served as the sole trustee since her 25th birthday. No disbursement is made without her signature. The words landed like a thunderclap. I watched the color drain from my father's face. His certainty faltered, his jaw tightening as his eyes darted to the document. My mother's hand flew to her necklace, her lips parting in disbelief. Kate's smirk wavered, her confidence cracking as her glass trembled in her hand. I let the silence stretch, then spoke evenly, my voice steady. "For 3 years. Every dollar you've spent the cars, the vacations, the condos has required my approval. You've built your life on signatures you never realized were mine." The room seemed to contract, the grandeur of the chandelier and polished silver shrinking into a spotlight of truth. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some averting their eyes. The Whitmores, who had spent their lives demanding respect, sat exposed under the weight of their own blindness. Richard's voice came next, sharp but thin. "This is a trick. You've done something. You can't possibly." Helen interrupted, her tone firm but calm. "The records are clear. Mr. Whitmore, your daughter has been the sole trustee since age 25. She alone authorizes all allowances, all property expenses, and all transactions related to the estate." She closed the folder with a quiet snap. "I'll await your decision. Miss Whitmore." Then she turned and left the room, her footsteps echoing in the heavy silence. I looked at the 3 faces before me, my father pale, my mother clutching her pearls, my sister frozen mid-breath. I met their eyes one by one and said, "You thought I had nothing, but it's always been me." Their certainty, so smug moments before, collapsed into silence, and I sat there, calm, while the truth settled over them like a storm they could not stop. The shock lingered long after Helen's heels faded down the hall. No one moved at first. The clatter of forks and glasses had stopped entirely, leaving only the hum of the chandelier above. My father's face was still pale, my mother's lips pressed tight as though holding back words she could no longer control. Kate stared at me, her glass trembling in her hand. the ruby red wine threatening to spill. I reached into my pocket and drew out my phone, the screen lighting the edge of my place setting. I scrolled to the message from David Collins, the bank manager who handled the trust's transactions. The words were waiting. Patient and exact. Confirm. Hold on all Whitmore family disbursements. I rose slightly in my chair, pressing the phone to my ear. My voice was calm, almost casual. Put a hold on everything. I said, no disbursements for Richard, Peggy, or Catherine Whitmore. Effective immediately. David's voice on the other end was clipped and professional. Understood. Miss Whitmore. It's done. I hung up, sliding the phone back into my pocket with a deliberate calm. Around me, conversations stumbled to life again, uneasy and fractured. Kate was the first to feel it. She pulled out her phone, tapping the screen, her manicured nails clinking against the glass, her brow furrowed, confusion replacing her smirk. What is this? She muttered. She tried again, her voice rising. My card's been declined. That's impossible. I just used it this morning. Her words cracked the silence wide open. My father leaned toward her, his irritation sharp. What's going on? Kate. She shoved the screen toward him, her voice trembling now. My accounts are frozen. The condo deal. She stopped, scrolling frantically. It's collapsing. The funds didn't clear. A hush spread across the table as the reality sank in. My mother clutched her necklace, her eyes darting between me and the screen in Kate's hand. This must be a mistake, she whispered. Though her voice shook, our accounts are fine. We've always been fine. But even as she spoke, doubt hollowed her tone. She turned toward my father, her fingers gripping his sleeve. Richard, what about the house? The taxes, is that safe? The question hung there, heavy, unanswered. My father's jaw clenched, but the certainty was gone. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. My voice cut the air with quiet finality. The mansion belongs to the trust, without my approval. There's no money for taxes, no money for anything. The words fell like a stone into deep water, sending ripples across the table. They looked at me as though I had become someone they no longer recognized. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by the raw sound of fear, just as the weight of my words sank into the room. My phone vibrated again. I glanced at the screen, and my breath caught at the subject line of the email flashing across it. Concerns about your startup's credibility. It was from a venture capitalist I had pitched to last year, someone whose backing could have changed everything. My chest tightened as I read further. The email detailed rumors that my company was nothing but a scam, a desperate grab for cash. And then the name appeared where the investor had heard those words. Catherine Whitmore. I raised my head slowly, my eyes locking on Kate across the table. You told investors my startup was a fraud, I said, my voice low but sharp. The room stilled again, all eyes turning to her. Kate froze, her glass halfway to her lips, color drained from her face. That's not true, she stammered, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. I held up my phone, the glowing email like a piece of evidence in a courtroom. It's right here, straight from them. They heard it from you. The murmurs from guests quieted, the air tightening. Kate's hands shook as she tried to regain her composure. Her voice faltered before she steadied it again, louder, harsher. I had to. Claire, you were dragging our family down with your app. I couldn't let you destroy our name. My mother's eyes darted to Kate, then back to me. Her face was caught between guilt and defiance. Claire, she said, her tone brittle. Your sister was protecting our reputation. Your company. It's risky. She was looking out for us. Richard leaned forward, his jaw tight, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. She didn't mean harm. Gossip spreads quickly in our circles. She was trying to shield us. The words hit harder than Kate's admission. They knew. They had known all along. My parents had chosen silence, chosen her, even when she sabotaged me. My throat burned, but I forced my voice steady. You all knew. You knew she lied to investors, tried to ruin my work, and you're still defending her. Kate seized the moment, desperate. Her eyes widened, her words tumbling fast. I did it for us, Claire. Your startup was a joke. I saved the family from humiliation. Her excuse landed weakly, her panic clear. The empire she had flaunted minutes ago was crumbling, and her hands shook as though she could hold it together with sheer will. I set my phone down on the table, my gaze cold. You thought you could break me, but for 3 years, every check that paid for your cars, your vacations, your deals, it came from me. And still, you chose betrayal. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Their faces, once smug, now trembled under the truth. Betrayal was no longer hidden. It was sitting openly at the table with us. I rose from my chair slowly, the legs scraping against the polished floor. Every eye in the room followed me, though no one dared speak. My father's jaw was set, my mother's lips trembled, and Kate's hands clutched her phone as if she could still call back the world slipping through her fingers. My voice came steady, though inside I felt the years of silence pressing behind it. For 3 years, I signed every check that funded your lives, your cars, your trips, your deals. Every bit of it rested on my signature, and all the while, you mocked me, called me weak, told me I was a burden. I let my gaze sweep across them one by one. Tonight. It ends. Kate shot up from her chair, her face pale, panic sharp in her voice. You can't do this. Claire, you can't just cut us off. I raised my hand, and her words fell away. You thought you held the power, but you've only been living off mine. My mother leaned forward, her pearls shifting against her collarbone, her voice breaking. Claire, we're family. You can't abandon us. The word family hit me harder than any accusation. My throat tightened, but I didn't let my voice waver. Family doesn't sabotage and lie. Family doesn't spread rumors to kill someone's dream. You made your choice when you stood by betrayal. The silence afterward was deeper than before, thick enough to hear the tick of my father's watch. His eyes darted to the grand chandelier above us, as though searching for authority there. But the certainty was gone. I stood taller. The weight of my decision no longer a burden but a release. There will be no more allowances, no more trust fund for you to drain. Every cent will be redirected into something that lasts longer than this table, a future that's mine. A whisper moved through the guests seated further down, but no one interrupted. They could see it too, the moment when an old order cracked open. I pushed my chair back into place, the gesture final. They had spent a lifetime writing me into the role of the weak one, the afterthought. Tonight, I rewrote the ending myself. I left my chair pushed neatly under the table, the gesture deliberate, as though to remind them I would not return to it. The dining room that had once brimmed with laughter and polished conversation now sat in stunned silence. My father stared down at his untouched plate, his hands clenched as if holding onto authority that had already slipped away. My mother's pearls trembled against her chest with each shallow breath. Kate's phone slipped from her grip, clattering against the polished wood, but she didn't reach to pick it up. I walked toward the door slowly, each step echoing across the marble floor. No one stopped me, no one dared. The guests, who had come expecting another evening of Whitmore grandeur, now kept their heads bowed, avoiding my eyes as though silence could shield them from what they had witnessed. At the threshold, I paused. The chandelier above cast a glow over the table where I had been an afterthought for years. The family that had dismissed me, mocked me, and betrayed me sat stripped of the certainty they once wore like armor. I felt no triumph, only clarity. I turned my head slightly, just enough for my words to carry back across the room. "You thought you could break me," I said, my tone calm. "Final, but I was the one holding you up, and I'm done." Then I stepped into the hallway, the heavy doors closing behind me with a quiet thud. I didn't look back. 6 months passed, and the Atlanta skyline looked different from the windows of my new office. The glass tower reflected evening light across the city, and inside, screens glowed with charts and code. My startup, the one they had called a joke, had become a rising name in the local tech scene. Reporters had written about us, investors had lined up, and our user numbers grew by the day. Each headline felt like a quiet vindication. But the real satisfaction came in the steady hum of work, the sound of a future built on my own terms. At the long conference table sat Emily Carter, my co-founder and the friend who had stood beside me through every rejection, every late night. She grinned as she pushed a stack of reports toward me. "We did this, Claire," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Not them, just us." I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. Yes, us. The trust fund that had once fueled their extravagance now fueled servers, salaries, and expansion plans. It was no longer a lifeline for the Whitmores. It was the foundation of something they could never take away from me. Meanwhile, whispers of my family reached me through old acquaintances. The mansion, that gleaming symbol of their status, had been sold at a loss. Without the trust to cover the taxes, the mortgage had swallowed them whole. Richard and Peggy now lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta, surviving on dwindling investments and what part-time consulting Peggy could manage. The galas, the private jets, the polished smiles at society dinners were gone. Kate's fall had been sharper. Her real estate career, once glittering, had unraveled when her biggest clients pulled out after her accounts froze. With her reputation scarred, she had taken a desk job at a small property firm, shuffling paperwork for a fraction of her former income. Her name, once spoken in admiration at cocktail parties, was now a caution whispered in quiet corners. She tried calling me once. The voicemail still sits unanswered on my phone. I couldn't bring myself to delete it, but I never pressed play a second time. The wound of her betrayal cut too deep. Standing in the glow of my new office, I realized this wasn't revenge. It was simply the truth finally finding its place. They had mocked me for dreaming, for refusing to bend into their mold. They had chosen loyalty to status over loyalty to blood. And when the reckoning came, it wasn't anger that ended them, it was their own choices. I looked out at the city, at the office alive with energy, and felt the weight of freedom in my chest. For years, I thought I needed their approval to stand. But I didn't. I never had. I whispered to myself, steady and quiet. I don't need them to succeed.